Amazing, thank you. All right, so hi everybody. As someone already pointed out, I have the unlucky luck of having to follow that up, so be nice to me, please. So, my name is Matt Poulter. I am also a PhD candidate at the Communication and Culture program at York University and Toronto Metropolitan University. I think, Erika, you're on the Toronto Metropolitan side, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, but we're all part of the cult.
Yeah, that's it. So, okay, thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one who makes that joke. Where is my ceremonial cloak? That's what I want to know. Anyway.
We want cloaks and swords.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Okay, I feel I'm on colleagues here. So, while I'm not presenting on something that's directly related to my immediate PhD research, mainly because I needed a break, I also am talking about something that is in some ways connected to the research that I do on the regular. My primary field is in the field of anime, but Japanese media as a whole as well, and anime is pretty much inextricable from manga for reasons that we will talk about in a second. But effectively, what I'm here to talk about is this current really unprecedented era that we're actually seeing in terms of manga fandom and sales and the like. Now, I don't know how many of you either have tweens and teenagers of your own or work with them on any regularity and the like. Okay, I'm at least seeing one hand up. But a thing that has come to light recently is that if there is a thing that age group really seems to have gravitated towards over the last little while, it is in fact manga. A good colleague of mine who teaches at the high school level has said, and I quote, quite literally all of my students read it. Now, I realize basing a presentation off anecdotal evidence is a bit of a fool's errand, but trust me when I say I'm going to have some stuff to back this up and the like. As a matter of fact, after I began planning this presentation, after it had already been pitched, I was fortunate enough to actually run a class on anime as a mini enrichment course through Carleton University, where I currently teach, which is basically, for those who don't know, a thing where a bunch of grade 8s and high school students can go to university for a week and do a mini course to kind of get an idea of what the resemblance is like. I did a course on anime, not to toot my own horn, it was massively popular, but what really kind of struck out with me there is that the number of anime fans was quite large in the group. For reference, about 85% of my students were in the 8th grade. However, what struck me even more was the number of students in there who said, I don't really watch much anime, but I own over 150 volumes of manga. That's impressive, to say the least. I don't think I have that level of disposable income now, let alone in 8th grade. So, suffice it to say, there's a question to be asked here, which is, what is going on? And so the thesis I have presented is that manga sales have seen exponential growth in the 2020s in particular, thanks to a unique combination of economic, technological, and cultural factors previously not experienced by the industry, or at least not all at once. So everyone's on the same page, because I realize we are all comic scholars ostensibly at this place, but manga is a little bit of an outlier from, say, studying Western comics or European comics and the like. I want to make sure everyone's a little bit on the same page here. So to give you the briefest summary of manga in a nutshell, and I have show and tell materials here, so you'll all get to see some stuff as well to illustrate my points. So, the modern style of manga was developed by cartoonists in Japanese youth magazines towards the tail end of the 19th century. However, Japanese cartooning dates back as far as the 1600s, as far as we know, so it is a style that in some way, shape, or form has existed for quite some time. The mid-20th century output, shall we say post-war Japan output in terms of manga, which we're mostly familiar with at this point, is heavily defined in its structural form by two particular series. The number one and probably best known being Osamu Tezuka's Tetsuwan Atomu, which we know best as Astro Boy, and one that has never really received an official translation in North America, but has remained nonetheless influential in Japan, is Michigo Hasegawa's Sazae-san. And these two effectively set the tone for the entire manga industry going forward. Not the least of which because Tezuka was a massive workaholic who refused to stop working even on his deathbed, and the standard that he set for the industry for both manga and anime production continues to affect the industry in a negative way today. I will not go into that right now, I don't have the time. But manga in particular is especially defined by its marketing towards specific age groups. And these are often things that terms that you see readily in both manga advertising and even in the names of publications that release them. There is probably best known as Shonen, which is directed at adolescent boys. Shonen Jump being the single biggest manga publication in print to this day and has been since the 1970s, if my math is correct. Shoujo, which is directed at adolescent girls, Seinen, which is directed at young adult boys, etc., etc., etc. And tons of different genres of manga fall within these, but manga, as I said, in terms of its advertising and how it's categorized, is very much defined on age and gender, not so much on necessarily categories, or genres, I should say. Talking about things in kind of moving into the present day in terms of manga, peak manga sales in terms of physical book sales in Japan peaked at 1.89 billion books sold in 1995 in Japan alone, which has recently dipped to 582 million as of the most recent kind of census taking of this information, which I got from the Japanese Research Institute for Publications. But that's largely because that as of present day, 70% of modern manga sales in Japan are actually digital as opposed to physical. And we have actually seen, despite this transition, a record high of manga sales in Japan as recently as last year, in which the industry brought in about 693 billion yen, or rather 6.93 billion Canadian dollars in 2023. This is a little bit of conjecture on my part, if you allow me. If Marvel and DC saw sales like this of comics, I don't think we'd have anywhere near as many movies. Just a guess on my part. Yep. And sales of these are bolstered by many things that we will talk about in a minute, but a big factor here is also that sales are bolstered by anime adaptations of popular manga. So, not always, but quite often, when a manga gets popular enough to have a massive readership, it typically gets an anime adaptation. This also leads to the very fun phenomenon where sometimes the anime adaptation catches up to where the manga is currently, and now the studio has to scramble to come up with their own finale, or they simply just put out a season and then go, if you want to know how the rest of it goes, go read the manga. It is secondary to manga as an industry, which we're going to talk about in a second, is actually kind of strange compared to how it's marketed in North America. And speaking of which, talking about manga in North America, manga has been a lot slower to take root in North America compared to how long it's been running in Japan. Here we can actually see some early examples of some of the manga that was brought over here, including the original Golden Key run of Astro Boy and the Eclipse Comics, then owned by Marvel, original printing run of Akira. Probably the biggest and best known manga and anime in the Western Hemisphere even to this day. Manga in North America has a very different reaction because anime has historically been the thing that was released in North America well ahead of the manga counterpart. For instance, Astro Boy first started broadcasting in North America in 1963, the exact same year as the television series release in Japan, whereas the manga of Astro Boy was not brought over here until 2 years later. And this has been a trend continuing just about up until the present day with manga releases in North America. It has been very slow to catch on versus anime, which has received the biggest push. And early manga licenses in North America were actually even primarily published in Western comic form. So I imagine most of you are aware of this, but in Japan, manga is read right to left as opposed to our typical left to right. They are often published in tankobon volumes, which are about this size right here. And when bringing things over here, Western publishers were like, well, our readers aren't going to be able to understand that, and so on and so forth. So they would often just outright flip artwork otherwise and stretch it to fit the comics format. Or, in the case of some of the few pre-80s manga licenses that came to North America, and I mean very, very few, they were often entirely redrawn by other artists. So Astro Boy released in Golden Key in 1965, as I just showed you here, that is not Tezuka's original art, that is art that was commissioned to follow in his style by a Western artist. Similar thing happened with Battle of the Planets, which was released by Golden Key in 1979, which is Science Ninja Team Gatchaman in Japan, probably best known by its international anime release of the same name that came out several years before the manga publication, with the first actual kind of officially licensed and kept artwork manga release in North America being Barefoot Gen by New Society Publishers in 1978, which was an incentive actually spearheaded by its Japanese publishers, because Barefoot Gen, for those who don't know, is a story about a young boy surviving post-atomic bomb Hiroshima, and it was very much viewed as a story of wanting to spread a message of peace worldwide, so that's how this happened. There's also a kind of an extensive history of North American adaptations of manga, even seeing publication here, even completely independent of the original release. And as luck would have it, I was actually visiting one of my favorite comic book stores on St. Catherine Street the other day, Capitaine Quebec, which is a pretty fun comic and action figure store. And I found this, a reprinting of the 1993 Adam Warren run of Dirty Pair, which is a beloved and kind of cult hit anime sci-fi series from the early 1980s, which I only recently found out there are actually references to Dirty Pair in Star Trek: The Next Generation. So that's as far as it's extended. So stay tuned for my eventual upcoming presentation on the impact that Dirty Pair in particular has had on Western media. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, manga had a slow trickle coming here. And it was primarily in the 80s where this began to change. Viz Media, which itself is a subsidiary of Japanese publishers Shogakukan and Shueisha, which are two of the biggest manga publishers in Japan, began importing the proprietary series released by these companies as early as 1987. And this is also when we get the aforementioned Eclipse Comics, then a subsidiary of Marvel, publishing Akira in 1988. And the Akira movie was actually imported to North America soon after, and that is effectively what blows the doors open on anime releases in North America and creates the wave that we see throughout the 80s and 90s, or through the 90s and 2000s, I should say. As I mentioned, 90C's increased releases of both manga and anime, largely thanks to visibility of anime on cable TV. This is when we get the original Canadian broadcasts of both Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z, which eventually make their way to the US. This is when Gundam first finds its way to North American shores in a major way. We get this influx of anime, and as a result, manga kind of gets a bit of a boost as a result. This is when Dark Horse Comics begins publishing manga, which I specifically highlight because that's going to become very relevant to our discussion in a minute. This is when the company Tokyopop is created, under a different name originally, who I've chosen to omit. And they released the first designated, quote, 100% authentic manga tankobon-style releases like this in the original right to left with the original art scaling in 2002. And because of the fact that these are so small and easy to carry, this is when manga starts to see distribution in massive major bookstores like Barnes & Noble, Indigo, what have you. The shelves become lined with these. And this continues on decently well until about the late 2000s, where the anime industry in particular, which, as I remind you, is the one that was definitely the bigger one first in North America, experiences a little bit of an industry crash where several North American anime distributors just fold in the late 2000s, even ones owned by companies within Japan for reasons I just cannot get into right now. And this is actually when we do see a little bit of a dip in manga licensing as well, because Tokyopop loses all of their major licenses in 2009 and then shutters in 2011. They have since reopened and are trying to become a thing again. It's the literary equivalent of making fetch happen. It's not gonna happen. So, for other reasons. Fast forward to the 2020s. Never has the phrase, may you live in interesting times felt like such a threat. But the 2020s are in fact unprecedented times for manga because things have kind of exploded, for lack of a better term. Barnes & Noble, as recently as 2020, or as early, I should say, at this point as 2020, reported upwards of a 500% increase in manga sales, specifically highlighting tweens and teens as the source of this. There were 24.4 million manga volumes sold in the US in 2021 alone. And to cap it all off, 6 of the top 10 best-selling comic creators in 2022 were manga creators, including volumes such as, modern hits such as Demon Slayer, Spy Family, Jujutsu Kaisen, but also some older long-running titles such as Berserk, which comes in at the number 10 spot. For reference, Berserk started the year I was born and is continuing to go even despite the original author's death a few years ago. Interestingly enough, number 2 on the list was in fact Tatsuki Fujimoto, the creator of Chainsaw Man. Real quick, does anyone want to take a guess as to what the number 1 seller was? I guarantee it's probably not what you think. Captain Underpants. Number 1 selling comic of 2022.
I should have known.
So, yeah, children's media.
Scholastic has taken
Yeah.
a large part of the market.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
DC and Marvel are probably
Yeah, I felt I need to
Looking
point
at
that
that.
out because I thought that was incredible. So, and this is another thing to note. Remember that thing I commented about if Western comics creators saw these kinds of numbers? Growth of manga sales has often, in many years recently, eclipsed that of Western comics, where I believe taken in 2022, manga saw a growth of 15% in terms of sales in the West, whereas, no, 16%, whereas Marvel and DC saw an increase in 5% that year. So. Again, if I were a shareholder at the moment, I'd be maybe looking over at the path of some of these creators.
Yeah.
And don't take it from me in order to reference this. Let Dark Horse's own comment reinforce this, where they revealed that manga is 1% of our output, but represents 66% of our sales. This is as recent as July last year. So, with all of that in mind, I think I've sufficiently impressed upon you the importance of talking about manga in terms of the presence of comics in the Western, in kind of Western media right now. But like all of you are probably asking right now, I'm kind of the whole point of this presentation was I was sitting there going, okay, why? I've been present for when manga has hit North America. I've been present for some of the initial waves. They didn't catch on the same way. So what the hell is happening now? And I've got some theories. This is where you'll have to allow me some conjecture, but based off information, I promise. But a couple of things really come to mind. Number one, we have to talk about economic factors. We are in a bit of a recession at the moment. People are spending less money on, shall we say, frivolities, though I hate calling comics that, but some of us here might decide to buy comics over food. Not that I endorse those notions, but most people are going to offer something like this. So, comparing two of the most popular series with teens right here, which I'll also pass around for people to peruse at their leisure, we have Volume 1 of Chainsaw Man, the aforementioned second highest selling comic author in the West as of last year. This volume, like most volumes of this manga, costs $9.99 US and features 192 pages of story printed in black and white on very pulpy paper. This is Volume 1 of Miss Marvel, published by Marvel Comics, still a very beloved comic run to this day that is often recommended to younger audiences. This is $15.99 US and encompasses 120 pages. Now, I'm sure some of you are going to say, well, Matt, that's printed on nice glossy paper, it's printed in full color, you have to pay the inkers and then the letterists and all that sort of stuff, whereas manga is strictly a one-person endeavor where typically the writer and author are the same person. So I do get that there's a reason for this, but if I am a teenager who thinks that Skyrim is the best video game ever because you can play it for 400 hours, chances are I'm going to be looking closely at what I'm going to get the most bang for my buck on. So I think that's important to mention. I'm also going to pass these around as well if anyone would like to take a look. But it goes beyond even just the physical purchases. Several manga publishers are offering digital apps at incredibly low prices. I'm sure some people here have tried to use Marvel Unlimited before for its $9.99 US a month, where it doesn't come anywhere near close enough to actually featuring their entire back catalog, and plenty of things are missing, and the app itself is a nightmare. Ask me how I know. Whereas something like Shonen Jump, the quite literal largest manga publisher in the entire industry, offers its app for $2.99 US a month. This gets you access to everything published in English by this company, more or less. And on top of that, if you don't even want to pay anything, let's say you've caught up through other means, usually about the 3 most recent chapters of each thing published by Shonen Jump is available for free. You don't even need to make an account, you can just read it. There's also, this cannot be stressed enough, rampant, easy to access fan translations and scanned manga available online. Don't ask me how I know that, because I'd like to not get in trouble. But manga is as accessible as anything, if not more so, entirely for free, and oftentimes even featuring full, fan-led, but quite well done translations of things long before they are even officially released in North America. Even plenty of things that have never received a North American release and are unlikely to anytime soon. So I think the economic factor is worth mentioning in this case because, if you're someone who wants to get into comics on the cheap or even for free, manga's a pretty good way to do it. Fan culture. We cannot not talk about this. Thank you, Erika, for the segue. So, manga has proliferated through tons of fan interactions. Now, this is where we kind of risk getting into territory where someone here could easily go like, well, Matt, that's true of Western comics as well, and I agree with that. But the point that I'm trying to make is all of these factors are kind of compounding at once right now. So, proliferation through fan interactions cannot be understated. There are anime clubs at individual schools. I don't know a lot of high schools that have comic clubs. My friends who are teachers tell me that just about all of them have an anime and manga club. Conventions, cosplay, participatory culture. You've all read Jenkins. I don't need to go into it too much. Subreddits, TikTok. Anime is huge on TikTok. A series that I loved in 2000, a science fiction series called Serial Experiments Lane that often kind of remains a bit of an underground hit, blew up on TikTok over the past 2 years because of its theme song getting big. And I had literally 2 different students in my anime class, I should say, choose to write final papers on it, despite it being older than they are. So there's also the fact that right now, YouTube is kind of going through a bit of a burgeoning scene of video essays, where it turns out 6+ hour videos are actually massively popular amongst a lot of viewers, especially younger audiences, because they like to throw it on while they're doing other things and you don't need to pay direct attention. Anime features prominently in this. You just need to look up anime video essay on YouTube, you'll have pages for miles. There's also this encouragement of participatory culture by the people who release this westward themselves. Crunchyroll, a former piracy site that is now owned by Sony and the official distributor of the vast majority of anime in the West, actually features Anime and Manga of the Year awards that they have fans vote on. Unsurprisingly, the stuff that tends to win is whatever the flavor of the month is. I'm not bitter or anything. Meme culture for anime and manga online is also extensive, and this cannot be understated as to how much of an onboarding measure this is. So I've provided some examples. So, meme culture extends to anime first and foremost, so it's a little tough to see, I know, but a very famous one that has existed for years is this one from the anime adaptation of popular manga Death Note, in which before it received an official translation, there were of course fan subs, which is a very big phenomenon online. And the character of Light is subtitled as saying, just according to Keikaku, with the title up above saying, translator's note, Keikaku means plan. So, which kind of baffles the mind about this, and this has become, I cannot tell you enough how many students have outright told me this was their introduction to anime, was seeing this shared online. Similarly, there was a very famous interview with who else but Studio Ghibli bigwig Hayao Miyazaki, talking about his distaste for the anime industry in 2014, with some very actually well thought up and conceived criticisms, but is often memed on to the effect of creating a subtitle of anime was a mistake, it's nothing but trash. Not what he actually said, but it's also not too far off either. And there are even memes that come up throughout anime culture about anime culture and about adaptation and things like that. And a lot of these I actually think are a lot smarter than the people creating them might think they are. So for instance, there has been a rash of anime and manga adaptations into live action series on platforms like Netflix. Andrew and I were fortunate enough to publish an article about Cowboy Bebop before the live action series went. I have never been so proud of something I wrote about something so terrible. But we have there this example of, here are these characters in the manga, here they are in the anime, and then here they are, here's an equivalent of what people might imagine them as in the Netflix adaptation. Not incorrect by many metrics. And of course, we even have inter-fandom infighting portrayed through memes in the sense of anime watcher exists, manga reader, do you want to know who dies at the end? So there is a bit of a clash between the two quite a bit, and I actually do think this is a pretty fun illustration of it. And because I need to make sure I include some level of professionally written academia in this, just to let you know that I am not just making this up as I go along, I will mention that a lot of this comes from the theory of the media mix by Mizuko Ito, who is a prolific fan scholar of anime and the like. In the media mix, she is specifically talking about the phenomenon of Yu-Gi-Oh! From the early 2000s, in which there is a manga, which leads to an anime adaptation, which leads to a card game, which leads to video games, which leads to all sorts of other stuff. And again, not something we can't say about Western comics either, but basically from the get-go, manga and anime have inextricably linked themselves into this media mix ecosystem. With Ito saying, the intertextual networks around Yu-Gi-Oh! Are extremely broad and dense, comprising publishing, television, video game, toy, and merchandising industries, as well as large and varied player and viewer groups, including children and families, as well as adults in core gaming communities. So I think that's very important to know when talking about this, that there is this kind of system in place that really allows this to become inextricably linked. And for example, here we have some very recent examples of additional media mix advertising / games from two of the biggest long-running manga of basically all time, where One Piece recently received a best-selling trading card game adaptation both in Japan and the West that has continued to make millions of dollars for Bandai Namco. And we see even the very recently releasing later this year, video game adaptation Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, the most recent video game in a line of media released for a series that originally began in manga form in 1984. So, the media mix continues on, even if the manga itself is maybe secondary in these fields, but definitely not secondary in terms of sales, especially not One Piece. And I'm going to wrap us up here because you've all been very patient with probably what I think is the most important factor of all of this, which is the accessibility and the ease of entry. I know that we all know that superhero comics are not the only entry into Western comic art. They are not the only example into non-Japanese comics art. There are plenty of things that aren't superhero comics, but they remain the public face of the medium whether we like it or not. And this is where someone trying to get into either might run into some difficulty with Western comics compared to that of manga. So for instance, as I've already established, we have the options between physical purchase, digital apps, official or otherwise, that allow for access to manga. Basically, if you have something capable of reading, you can read manga on it. There's also the ready availability of it. Manga chapters by long-running series in Japan are released weekly in weekly collections and publications, and they are often translated officially and available on these apps within 48 hours of their release in Japan. So if you're someone who constantly wants that new input of stuff, you can get it on these apps. And reminder, new chapters often get released for free initially, so you might not even have to pay a cent to follow your favorite series if you've caught up. There's also the diverse array of genres, subjects, themes, aesthetics, etc. Because of manga's direct marketing towards age groups rather than via particular genres, you do see some genres rise to the top in terms of sales. It's no coincidence that all of those top-selling manga artists are authors of what we would call battle shonen manga, because it quite frankly is the most popular, but it tends not to pigeonhole itself quite as much in the sense that people don't look at manga, and at least most people don't tend to think that battle shonen is the only thing available, whereas Western comics have a little bit of a perception problem amongst the public where they look at Western comics and they think superheroes. Mm-hmm. And this is the big one at the very end, is that manga series are not only entirely sequential, they go in a very strict order, sometimes with maybe a prequel or maybe a side story if it gets especially popular, but they're often entirely self-contained. You do not need to read a completely separate manga from the one that you are enjoying in order to actually follow the story of the characters that you like. And because I just talked about the importance of meme culture, I can think of no better way to end this presentation than this one, which I think summarizes this entire issue better than I ever could. I think everyone in here at some point has gone through the thing of, I want to read this series, where do I start? Comics. You can start at Batman #1 from 2011, not to be confused with Batman #1 from 1940, or Batman #1 from 2016, or Batman Year 1, etc., etc. Manga. Chapter 1. Where do you go next? Chapter 2. Onwards until the end of time. So here are my sources. Thank you very much.